spending the money up front on good design can definitely save you money later on. If you invest the time and money before the project starts.
Absolutely. Well, and ironing out all of your program as well. I mean, I've heard it said we can see around corners. We know what's coming and we know what to anticipate and how to create a holistic design solution. So even at a smaller project scale, just to have something that's comprehensive and understands exactly how we're intervening into this house. Because, again, a plan sketch on paper can look very straightforward, but, how we tie into all the existing stuff you can do it well or you can do it less well. And that really shows in
Yeah.
the finished product.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of season 2 of the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. I'm your host, Curtis Lawson, and I am joined today by my friend Danny Rigg with Rigg Studio Architecture. Danny is an architect, obviously, here in Houston, and we are going to continue this season 2 discussion about what do things cost. And as you've already heard us say several times in this season, this is really more about kind of what drives the cost of things and why things cost what they cost, because every project's different, every situation's different, so your cost is going to be really variable on these things. But we want to help you understand how architects arrive at fees and what kind of like how they charge and what drives those costs. So I appreciate Danny joining me today. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Why don't you tell us all about yourself and your company, how long you've been in business, how you got into the business, and kind of what types of projects you guys do.
Yeah. So I graduated from University of Houston here in town, 2008, which, if you recall, is a great time to enter the profession.
Yeah.
So I got a lot to learn during the first economic downturn of my professional career. Worked for a structural consultant here in town, and then worked for a couple of award-winning architecture firms, small in nature, and had got the opportunity to be part of every phase of construction. So really, got to learn about how to work with clients, how to work with contractors, everything from an early day. And then the stars all aligned for me to start my own practice in 2016. My primary focus in doing that was really to bring in some of this new software that is changing the industry. So I'm a sole practitioner, just me from the very first design sketches all the way to the last coat of paint goes on the project. But having 3D rendering and visualization from the very beginning, using some really exciting software. It's Autodesk Revit, not to get too technical, and then Inkscape 3D walkthroughs so the clients can see lighting and views and materials and all kinds of really interesting things that we're not asking them to interpret what lines on a page mean anymore. And that was a big part of my service model, was to bring that in early and to have a very collaborative design approach. So I work on residential projects of a variety of scales, everything from modest additions and renovations to all new construction to historic restoration. From here to Galveston, actually, it's always fun when you get something on the island to work on as well. So yeah, a little bit of everything. I get a lot of calls from contractors that say, "I don't know if this project is too small for you," and I don't ever want that to be a limiting factor, because I think good design and good architecture really should be open to everyone. I actually have some affordable housing prototypes. I'm working with the city of Houston. I won a design competition for a new prototype that could be built in the various complete communities around the city. So that's another one that's kind of ongoing. So yeah, everything from high end to affordable housing, all different scales, scopes, budgets, locations. But I enjoy it. I love the process. I love working with interesting people and using some really cool technology. The 3D walkthroughs, virtual reality walkthroughs. It's good stuff. So.
That's awesome. I think I wish that everybody would get to the point of using Revit or some sort of 3D modeling software. It's so hard for people who don't do this every day, like you and I, to visualize what a set of 2D blueprints looks like in a 3D built environment. And you know I think after doing this for 20 years, I can look at a set of blueprints, plans, and I can imagine what that space is. But that took me quite a while to develop that skill. So yeah, it's a game changer for the client to be able to see that.
Oh, it's really a powerful experience, and it's a lot of fun too. In the early stages, we'll work with what we call a paper model or something like that, where it's all white finishes. But you're still seeing the light, you're still seeing the views, and we can get it geolocated so you see your sun angles and everything, because that's all part of the design process. So being able to bring the client into that, and as we'll talk about today, every architect has their own design process and client management strategies, things like that throughout the whole process. But for me, I really like that open, collaborative nature that they can see how these decisions are made. And during our design review meetings, we're actually making real time updates. It could see the impact of what it means to open up that wall or to add a door here or to change this view and lighting. And yeah, I just find that to be so much more fun. It's something they're engaged in. They feel like they had a hand in crafting, alongside the expertise that I can provide. And it also helps the contractors have a good understanding of the work too. So yeah, the industry is definitely going that way, but you don't see it too often at the residential scale right now. We're working our way up to it. So.
Yeah, I mean the technology is not new anymore, but it takes a number of years for things to kind of transition into the residential world. It seems like they always happen first in commercial, and then that commercial stuff kind of drifts into residential slowly. I think a lot of that is just residential design professionals having to learn new software and invest the money in new software. Where you have a big office of architects that maybe 20 people in the office that are all used to using AutoCAD, and maybe some of those have been in the business for a long time, and trying to learn a whole new software and pay for that new software is difficult. Whereas somebody new coming in, somebody younger coming in, they're using it from the beginning. So I think as we see kind of one generation of architects, designers retire, I think we'll see more of that start taking place. Why should somebody work with a architect? I think that question is obvious on a new home custom design, right? But on a smaller project, you mentioned you do all size project. On a smaller project, what are the benefits of using a design professional on even a smaller project where you're like, oh, I can just do that myself. But what do you bring to the table on a small project?
Oh, yeah, I think it's a great question because on the outset it seems like, oh, well, I'm just doing a real simple, bathroom addition here, no big deal. But what an architect brings to the conversation and the design process is looking at everything holistically. So, especially on a very strategic and limited remodel or renovation addition, you have to consider your existing building systems. You have to consider how your AC is going to serve this new space, if that system needs to be upgraded, what it means to tie into existing assemblies. And you could make a what looks to be a complete solution with a sketch on a piece of paper and say, "Yep, we're good. Let's start construction," and then find out all kinds of things that an architect would already be attuned to, would know that that's coming, and could address it prior to that. So you limit surprises. No one likes surprises during construction, so we do what we can to get all that ironed out, documented on paper, and priced out before any of that starts. But it's a holistic solution, and it comes from years of training. It's the degree path. It's 5 years for a bachelor of architecture, or six, 4 and 2 to get a master, and then you have 3.5 years or so of license or documented experience in various project areas, and then depending on, I had 7 exams. I think they're down to 5 or 6 now. So you're getting somebody that's been in the industry for a while, that has seen a lot of the ways that things can go sideways or problems that um, I've heard it said we can see around corners. We know what's coming and we know what to anticipate and how to create a holistic design solution. So even at a smaller project scale, just to have something that's comprehensive, um, and understands exactly how we're intervening into this house, because again, a plan sketch on paper can look very straightforward, but um, how we tie into all the existing stuff can, you can do it well or you can do it less well, and that really shows in
Yeah.
the finished product.
And actually, smaller projects and remodels can be harder and take more skill to design sometimes in a new freestanding structure, because you're trying to figure out how that's going to tie in, interact with the existing structure. You think about things like, how do we get AC to that new area? How are all these things going to connect to each other? How do those roof lines work together? You see a lot of additions that aren't well thought through, especially when we're going in and looking at older homes. We'll see like a 1950s or 60s house with these funky roof lines that have been tied in, or these flat roofs that don't make sense or don't drain well. And it's just because someone didn't plan it well. It just kind of got slapped on there. So those types of things, especially by being able to do some of that modeling, that 3D visualization, you can see how all that stuff's going to come together, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's I think that there's a tendency to think that that's overkill, and there are not many times where an architect is consulted for projects of smaller scope. They are challenging to be profitable on, at that scale, I think. But at the same time, that's something where by staying intentionally small as sole practitioner, I want to be able to help people solve problems. Whether that's an accessibility upgrade, kind of for universal design, if we need to make some place that's wheelchair friendly, elevators and curbless showers, things of that nature. All the way down to um, As to your point, it gets really interesting when people want to add program to a house without changing the outside boundary of the home. So we have to reconfigure the puzzle of how all these spaces meet together, and that's one where an architect can really excel at kind of reconfiguring these pieces to work. But yeah, there are unique challenges that come along with that, especially with tight property line setbacks and not a lot of room to grow. So yeah, somebody that can solve the puzzle in that manner, I think, is really beneficial at that scale.
And I think that also spending the money up front on good design can definitely save you money later on. If you invest the time and money before the project starts, you're not, you're possibly avoiding change orders. You're possibly avoiding, um, lost time for, hey, now we have to in the field we have to figure out how this is going to happen later on the fly. So you're potentially saving time and money later by spending that up front.
Absolutely. Well, and ironing out all of your program as well. I mean, sometimes you get into construction and the owner has a lifestyle change and says, "Well, I need to add an elevator." And that's a fun curveball to try to, we're already under construction and how do we make all this stuff work? But in other cases, you may just not like the way a space feels. And we want to figure that out on paper and 3D modeling before the framing is done. That's always, one of my nightmares is that a space gets framed up and a client walks in and says, "Oh, I didn't think it was going to feel like this."
Hmm.
And that's where the virtual reality walkthroughs, the 3D renderings, the whole design process that we go through helps to make sure that you're comfortable, confident, and excited about what's going to be built, and not saying, "Well, I need to really add an extra room over here," and that creates some real headaches for everyone involved. So,
I think too sometimes though that people when they walk into a space that's framed, they might get nervous because a a framed space that's not enclosed yet with exterior walls, drywall, it's going to feel totally different. So also you can give them some confidence at that point that yes, this space as it's framed, this feels wrong, but trust me, we've done these models, we've done this design. Once this is enclosed and built, you're going to feel differently about it too.
oh,
It,
absolutely.
it can help build some confidence for the homeowner.
Well, and that's another part of the architectural services here that we haven't really covered too much is that it's not just handing over a set of plans. It's a full relationship from the very first design review meeting all the way through project completion. And it's there to basically address those kinds of issues, to make sure that the plans are being followed, that that the clients are getting what they paid for, the life safety issues are all respected, things like that. So it's an ongoing relationship. It's always unfortunate whenever a potential client approaches me and says, "Oh, I just need a set of plans drawn," because you're really wasting an opportunity. First off, you may not find many architects that are willing to entertain that conversation, but
Right.
it's because there's so much more to it than just putting lines on paper and walking away. So
Yep. So what are some ways that that architects and I don't want to limit this just to architects. We've had this conversation a couple of times now with some other guests, architects, home design professionals, and I want to be clear. Architects have a different set of licensing and education requirements than a home designer would have. That doesn't necessarily mean that home designers are bad designers or unskilled people. I was talking about this with Toner a couple of days ago when he was in here, and a lot of fantastic home designers out there as
yeah.
well who are very qualified. Also, a lot of really bad architects. So anyway, how are some typical ways that architects, home designers price their services?
So I'll provide kind of an overview of each one of the pricing models along with the strengths and weaknesses, challenges, opportunities that come
Yeah,
along with it. So
perfect.
yeah, probably to kick it off is just hourly services. And so the architect will propose an hourly fee, and that may vary depending on the staff member that's working on it. If it's a drafter or a principal or kind of where you are in that hierarchy. But it's basically just an open hourly services model. And I think client and owner gets concerned that that's a writing a blank check, and it's also flawed in the way that it doesn't really reward efficiency. And so, if you're a bad architect and you take 2 times as long, well, you don't really pay a price for that. The owner does, and so there are some challenges with that. But in the earliest stages of the project, if we don't really have a firmed up program, and by that I mean we don't know the exact area of the house or covered area or how many bedrooms, bathrooms, what style of kitchen, things like that, it can be helpful to start that relationship with this hourly rate until we can really define what all the different project parameters are firmly, and then move on. The next one in order probably would be a percentage of construction costs. So this is one where we don't really have that in the beginning, but we think that, oh, the project is going to be a $500,000 project. And so the architect will take an appropriate percentage of that in their early estimates and kind of bill you up to that point until we get a general contractor on board, firm up that price, and then that kind of sets where their fee lands. There are challenges there because not all, you know, parts of construction warrant that same kind of percentage rate, if that makes sense. Like not all of them require that level of design service. And then, sometimes the owner takes some of the scope on their own or outside of that contract. And so, how does that affect the fee if the architect's still designing that work? Another challenge with this one is that if the owner happens to select the low bid contractor, which happens unfortunately, that means that the architect's fee is lower, but the construction process is going to be much more challenging and going to require a lot more time and coordination. And
Right.
so, whereas if you hired the best firm in town to build the house or project, they're going to need less coordination, but the project's going to be more expensive. So the architect gets compensated more. So that's kind of a weird one in itself.
Yeah.
On to link your fee to something that you don't have control over or has so much variability. Next is going to be cost per square foot, and I don't know how common it is. And granted, I'm just speaking from my personal experience and not by any means for the entirety of the profession.
Right.
But the cost per square foot method in residential, I think, is challenging. I think when just because the number of bedrooms and bathrooms and kitchens versus living rooms, outdoor entertaining spaces, all these things, they don't really have a flat rate that can be applied.
Yeah.
So that one is uniquely challenging.
A guest bedroom is a lot less work to design than a kitchen.
Well, and then you find out that there's a second catering kitchen and an outdoor spice kitchen and all these things that, it kind of messes that up. And in the same way that price per square foot numbers in construction kind of get skewed by that same
Right.
information. And then last would be just a stipulated sum, fixed price. Architect is going to charge X number of dollars in order to design everything. And if that's having to be quoted at the onset of the project, then there's going to be a lot of contingency in that because you have to accommodate design revisions and scope changes, and you'll have a list of optional or additional services that would help to kind of cover that in the same way that change order during construction would. But that number is going to have some padding to it because it has to. And so we're trying to find the right balance between what's fair to the owner, fair to the architect, and I think a lot of it comes down to define as much of the project scope as possible.
Yep.
Because when you're designing and putting together a new house, for example, and I've had this happen so many times where the owner says, "Well, actually, I want to add an extra bedroom and bathroom," and it's like, well, that blows up the whole thing because you can't just tack that onto the side of the house and have it not look exactly like that's what happened.
Yeah.
Things like that, ironing out as much of it early on, and defining that project scope and trying to hold to that, but also being a clear communicator, really engaging with the design. The last thing you want is for after design reviews are complete and we're ready and moving forward, that's when you finally take a close look at it and decide, well, I really want a pocket door there and want to change this here. And so those are complications that will add to the overall fee. So a lot of it comes down to how much of the project is known, how comfortable the architect is with the scope, and then that they'll probably find a pricing model that fits the project parameters. Because in terms of the things that can influence it, the site location can be a big part of it if there's a lot of travel time. How challenging an owner might be. I've had a lot of husband and wife or partner duos that see things very differently, and I get to be a marriage counselor during the design process, or you get in those really weird conversations where it's like, I need y'all to work that out and then come back to me with an answer on how you want to proceed because I can't get in that. That's um so what I think we're seeing more and more in the profession is we charge a flexible fee for the things that we don't have control over, and then we charge a fixed fee for the things that we do. So in the early stages of the project, where everything's kind of fluid and unknown and coming together, that's going to be a flexible pricing model, whether that's just hourly or some kind of set defined something. But that allows the project to evolve into the shape, form, and program that it needs to be. And then at that point, the architect and consultants know what it's going to take to get a permit ready and construction ready set of plans. And so that may shift to a fixed fee style or something of that nature. And then when we move into construction, because the owner's selecting the contractor and we're not really sure what it's going to take and how much assistance or coordination or correction might be required, that we shift back into something flexible like an hourly services model. And unfortunately, that doesn't lead a lot of concrete, here's what an architect will cost. But at the same time, you're not really going to have a number that applies to every design firm in town anyway, because a firm's reputation and portfolio, and also their level of services. So for me, doing full 3D visualization versus somebody else that really just puts out a 2D set of AutoCAD plans, those are going to be very different service models and pricing accordingly.
Yeah.
I wish I could answer your question with more resolution than that, but what you'll find is that most architects would be happy to have an introductory meeting to walk the site with you to talk through your project and to kind of provide a little more information on how they would price and how they'd want to move forward. And you know, so much of it too is going to be about relationships and connection. I think there's a tendency to want to commoditize architects and architecture and just say, "Well, I just need a set of plans." And as we talked about, that's really wasting an opportunity. You want to find someone that does work that you resonate with, that you enjoy, and then somebody that you get along with.
Yeah.
And something to be mindful of too, and questions to ask is when you go, meet some of these firms, who are you going to be working with? What's your project team going to look like? And what I like about my practice is it's going to be me. It's going to be me at every meeting, whether through design or construction. But you may find that sometimes you get passed off to um, someone else in the firm that you may not like, may not connect with, and so just make sure that just with your general contractor that you really have a good working relationship because there are good days and there are challenging days, and you want to make sure you've got a team of people around you that you can trust and that you enjoy being with to work through this because it can be fun.
So those pricing models that you mentioned, which one of those do you usually use personally in your
Sure.
firm?
Yeah, so I have kind of that hybrid
That hybrid
solution.
approach,
Yeah,
yeah.
basically anything that I have control over. What I've been doing lately is keeping things at an hourly rate with an estimated fee outline that kind of shows the owners anticipate this kind of time and this chunk, and we haven't gotten really too much into the typical architectural services. They're divided into phases, and these kind of blur together in residential a little bit, but you still follow the same progression. But it
Yeah.
starts from schematic design, which is your broad overview stuff. Then it moves into design development, and that's where we're kind of getting into building systems and a little more resolution. Again, very broad down to very specific. From design development, we've pretty much locked in what we're doing, and then the architect and other consultants go into heads down drafting, drawing, and construction documents, and that's getting ready for permitting, final pricing. And it will go to the city, it will go to the contractors for pricing, and that's in the bidding phase. And then from there, we go into construction contract administration services, which is a long way of saying what the architect does during construction.
And that was actually my next
Oh,
question. So let's talk about that. So construction administration, it's often abbreviated just as CA
sure.
in the industry. So is that something that you like to do, a service that you offer? And then is that typically included in your fees, or is that a separate hourly fee? Or, I've seen different models from different architects, but how do you handle that?
Yeah.
And do you like doing that?
Well, I love it. I mean, it's from a personal perspective, it's the best way to learn how your drawings are being read, used, what's missing, what's needed, and also just to see, oh, well, that subcontractor built it this way because that's how they interpreted the drawings, and that's
Yeah.
not quite what I wanted. So I know that we need to have a conversation about it, but also moving forward, I need to make sure that I call out these special details or things of that nature. It's always my preference to be involved all the way through.
Yeah.
But I also understand that architects or owners will see this as just another added cost. And they'll say, you know what, I really trust my contractor. I'm good. I don't need the architect on here. I've got a pretty good understanding. And you know what? Sometimes that works great, and sometimes it really doesn't. The architect during construction is there to say, this is taking a little longer than it should, or hey, that bid on that number that was a little higher than it should be, or that contractor is telling you that that quality is suitable, but it's really not based on the specifications and what we were calling for and asking for. Or in the case of renovation, boy, we didn't know there was going to be a beam right there. Or here's a beam that was notched by the plumber that is really inappropriate and needs to be addressed. And so those are the kinds of things that, especially in renovation, if we're not there to see it, to observe it, to document it, then there's no way that we could address it and give you a holistic solution. But there are times where projects are far away and I'm not able to be as involved as I would like to be. And there are times where the owners say, you know what, I have a good vibe with this contractor, so we don't need you around anymore. But the expression I hear applied to this is spend a penny to save a dollar. Get your architect on site because they can provide so much value during those walkthroughs that you'll be better for it.
Yeah.
But it is an added cost, so I understand the hesitancy about it. But in many cases, that's why you brought an architect on and not just someone to just draw a plan and walk away from it.
We've talked about the importance of third party inspections, verifications a number of times on this podcast over the last couple of seasons. But that CA process, it really benefits, to me, all parties involved. Like you mentioned, it actually benefits you as the architect because it helps you learn and grow in like seeing your drawings put into action. And I'm sure there's also just some personal satisfaction just walking a job site and saying, "Hey, I designed this and I'm seeing it come to life, right? Um, so there's that side of it. There's, as you mentioned, maybe the subcontractor is interpreting these things a certain way, and it helps you learn. Hey, if I draw this differently, then it helps the subs, right? So there's a learning aspect for you, but then it provides value to the client because again, it's that third, fourth set of eyes on the project besides just the builder, the owner. We really advocate that the architect, the engineer, building performance consultant, all these people are doing like scheduled walkthroughs during the process so that they can just make sure that the owner is, number one, getting what they paid for, and number two, that the quality is what it should be. And as a builder, um, and I think my project managers would say this as well. When you're walking through the same job site all the time, there's certain things that you focus on, and everyone kind of has their kind of pet things they look for, I think. So I walk into a job site. There's certain things that I'm laser focused on, and other things sometimes tend to disappear. And so by bringing in the architect, the engineer, these other people who are more in tune with other areas of the house than I may be looking at, it's just setting it up for a better chance of success across the board.
Oh, absolutely. And you've spent a lot of time studying these plans and pricing them out and picking up as many details as you could, but no one knows that house design better than the architect because of how much time has already been spent. And in my case, how much time is spent in 3D walkthroughs and everything else. So we'll walk on job sites and just immediately notice, that cabinet's at the wrong place. That was already put in and everybody saw it and thought it was okay because of their understanding of the scope. But these are things that immediately jump out to me. And the benefit of bringing me out early and on a scheduled basis is that, yeah, we can catch those kinds of things before all the tile work has been done and the finish has been applied around it. And so things get complicated and therefore a bit more expensive for everyone involved in correcting that. So,
I will say that I think the with the 3D stuff, there's probably less conflict or fewer questions that arise because again, they're just more visualized. The subcontractors understand the subs, the owner, the builder. Everyone has a better understanding of what that's going to look like or supposed to look like. Again, versus interpreting 2D lines.
well, and I like the term that Revit and basically building information modeling BIM is a term that you'll hear kicked around a lot. But it's a very honest design because it's very hard to cover up reality in this situation because it's all 3D modeled. So roof design you mentioned earlier is a perfect example. It's very easy in 2D drafting to just draw some lines and be like, "There's the roof." But on my projects, we see it all in 3D and we can see, well, looks like there's going to be a lot of water that's flowing to this one spot. So we want to go ahead and make sure that that's addressed in the right way. Or how things connect and meet is that there's no way to hide from reality and how these things are actually meeting in the software. So, this is the same software suite that's used to build high rises and schools and commercial buildings, and it has tremendous value even at small scale custom residential for the same reason.
I meant to ask you earlier when we were talking about this. Do you work with an engineering firm that also uses Revit? And do those engineering and architectural drawings mesh with each other in Revit?
It's not happening at the scale of the projects that I work on just yet. It may reach that point, but the engineers I work with, they've got a workflow established that is sizing the steel beam and drawing a certain dash line to indicate a steel beam, and there's not really a benefit for them to model that because they're not really um, what I end up doing is basically modeling the structure where it's appropriate. We've got some tight conditions, or we want to make sure we can fit ductwork in and around things. Is I'll go ahead and bring their information into my model. But no, I don't see that at the residential scale. And likewise, I haven't had a contractor request any kind of BIM files to do takeoffs or anything like that because I think at the scale at which we work, subcontractors they kind of have their methods of pricing, and
Yeah,
that's just sort of
I think that's the next evolution of this. I mean, I know some builders and sorry, some architects and engineers that I've talked to in other cities, other states, are doing that now. The engineers are doing everything in Revit. The contractors are using that to get their materials takeoffs. Because if all parties are using that, I mean, you can count the number of studs, you can count the number of rafters, and you can see all that stuff. When it's all working together. So I think that's where it will go, and I hope that's where it'll go. That's exciting to me to think about that.
Yeah, well, like you said, the architectural profession is slowly adopting this, and it'll
Yep.
find its way
Same with
through.
engineers.
Yeah. What I love is that we put in this effort early on to build these 3D models, and we get so much mileage out of that throughout the entirety of the design process, down to interiors and cabinetry colors and countertops. Is that I can actually plug in all those finishes and we can see them at scale. Because you might like a 2 inch by 2 inch sample, but when you see your big island top with that, yeah, that might be a bit too noisy than what you wanted to see there. So we get a lot of value out of that, from furniture layout to finishes to everything. So it is an important tool in the design process and all the way through construction. And even during construction, when contractors or others need questions, clarifications, like you said, there's no better way than sharing a rendering of how a shower should come together, because those line drawings sometimes leave a little bit to be interpreted, and we
Yeah.
want to minimize any sort of confusion or that level of trying to put the pieces together on site. So.
Do you guys also handle interiors, like interior selections and finishes?
I do, but I do not pretend to be an interior designer or someone that. It's such a subjective part of practice, as I'm sure any interior designer can speak to. You really have to understand the language and preferences and tones of the project and what the owners are really interested in, what they resonate with, respond to. So when it comes to helping with tile, countertops, and cabinetry layouts, things like that, but I find it's challenging to then shift gears from dealing with structural design and everything else to then go pick out rugs and furniture and window treatments and things like
Oh,
that.
sure.
I have done that in the past, but I find that that's really not where my skill set is most best utilized. Perhaps is a way to say that I feel competent, but not leading the pack on that by any means. So I'm happy to work with interior designers or decorators, anyone that joins the project team.
Yeah.
And then if they have selections, we can plug those into the model and kind of work with that. So.
Yeah, that was my next question. Is if that designer brings you some finishes, you can pop that into your model, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that we didn't touch on is that we've had to become very flexible with supply chain concerns and material availability. And what I found, pre-pandemic, was that we'd make all these selections and then find that, well, that one's way out that way. And sometimes pricing is concealed from architects, so we get $1 sign to $4 signs, and it's like, well, that's not really that helpful. And then we find that that really wasn't in the budget or didn't work out well. So really believe in a collaborative process and working closely with the contractor and who's doing all the purchasing, fabricating, and everything else, just to make sure that all of our selections are in line with the project goals for budget and availability, schedule, timing, all that comes together. So, but yeah, I mean that's every project is different. You don't always need that level of interior design, but when we do, I'm more than happy to help that BIM model, that 3D model, work as part of that selection process too.
Aside from architecture, and then we just touched on design a little bit, what are some other costs that people should expect to encounter before construction? So let's say, because oftentimes everything up to the point of the start of construction is cash out of pocket. And then you can, depending on your lender, you can get reimbursed in your loan for some of those out of pocket expenses. But probably from the time you start working with your team until construction starts, there's going to be a significant out of pocket cost. So aside from architecture fees, interior design fees, what other typical costs should the people expect to spend?
Sure. Well, it really starts with a property survey, and I wish that everyone took just much better care of their surveys. But these documents, they get faxed and folded and crumpled up and copied and scanned again, and that's when I get it and try to figure out if that blurry little number is a 5 or a 3. So an up-to-date property survey is going to be essential for everything that you do moving forward. But that's pretty much the starting point.
And not just a regular survey. Well, depending on the project, not just regular survey, but oftentimes that survey needs to be topographic, trees, power lines, and power lines is one that gets missed a lot.
Yes, absolutely. And the topographic data, especially for floodplain development, finding out how we're going to be modifying the site for cut and fill calculations and all the things that are really fun parts about building in Houston. But
Yeah.
that becomes a very big part of it.
Well, and for people who are listening in other parts of the country, the topographic can be a huge portion of it. If you're building somewhere there's hills and mountains and things like that, that topographic portion is extremely important.
Depending on the scope of the project, and for new construction, you're typically going to have a geotechnical investigation. So they'll come out with a big drilling rig and take a couple of coring samples down to 10 feet, 12 feet, 20 feet. Kind of depends on the site conditions, and they'll analyze your soil conditions because that informs what kind of foundation options are going to be appropriate for you. Um, and it's so you're going to have that report that needs to be done. And again, if it's a small renovation interior job, of course that doesn't apply. But new construction or substantial additions to houses, typically that comes into play because it's important to know how that soil is going to perform in Houston. I think you had yeah, touched on that on a previous episode.
Yeah,
So.
I mean the engineer is going to require it, and oftentimes the city is going to require it as well for permitting.
So you have your architectural services that we kind of covered up to this point. Once the design is firmed up, that's kind of in that design development phase that we were discussing earlier. You're going to bring a structural engineer in to start putting design together there. And then depending on the site conditions and what you're doing and where the property is located, sometimes a civil engineer or someone that can provide drainage, uh, calculations and studies. And there are a lot of structural outfits that can do that as well. I think it's part of their service model. So you got to cover that base. So typically, and then depending on if you're going to bring in a landscape designer, landscape architect, interior designer as well, these all kind of come in where appropriate. A pool contractor, if you're going to have that something really complicated brought in, getting them in the process early so the equipment is all ironed out.
A pool design firm or a maybe a lighting design firm. Yeah, obviously a lot of this depends on the scale of the house or the kind of the price range of the house. Typically, the more expensive, the more consultants are going to be involved. So you start moving into those upper end properties. There's usually a lighting designer. Maybe on certain jobs, there might be a MEP design involved. That's not as common for residential, but on big, complex projects, you may have an MEP designer that's mechanical, electrical, and plumbing.
Yeah,
Right?
and typically we deal with a building performance consultant, like one of your
Yep.
previous guests, and
Definitely.
and
Yeah.
uh, and that covers the mechanical side of it. I wish we got to work with MEP engineers on residential projects, but it's very rare. And that's as you said, it really depends on the project scope, the scale. Because I don't want somebody that wants to take on a very modest and appropriate addition to their house to think, oh my gosh, I have to get a lighting designer and all. No, it's
No.
really specific to kind of what your design goals
It's
are.
also dependent on the city that you're in. Even certain kind of small cities within the Houston area may require some of that. For example, the memorial villages require some duct design, and they require a electrical
Load
load
analysis.
analysis. Yeah, so different municipalities may have different requirements for what you have to have in those plans. So you may be forced to bring some of those people in, and some of those are cheap, maybe a few $100, but some of them could be thousands of dollars. So it's important to kind of, when you're planning that project, to understand that these are all the out of pocket costs that I might have, because on planning a large custom home, uh, you may have, 30, 40, 50, 70, $100,000, depending on the scope, out of pocket before you ever even get a permit.
It's definitely possible to get in that territory. I mean, depending on the scope, it can be significantly less, but yeah, it really does depend on how many team members you want to bring to the table and what level of fit and finish that you're going for. So there are ways of getting it done
Yeah,
for far less, but
sure.
more as well.
Yeah, I mean that's directly related oftentimes to kind of the price range of the project and the size of the project. If you're in a not the most expensive neighborhood, a modestly sized home, then those fees are obviously going to be a lot less. But when we start talking about planning a large custom build, I think people are often surprised at how much they're going to have out of pocket before they ever see something happen
Well, and that's one
outside of the
where,
design.
yeah, where clear communication with an architect can really help because we're not here to spend every last penny dollar that you have available. If you say, I really want to hit this target, that's what we design towards. And there's a hesitancy, I think, for owners to share how much they're actually willing to spend on something because they think we're gonna take that and run with it. And really, it's just to understand, well, I want to do this addition, but I only want to spend X number of dollars. And it's like, well, let me stop you right there because unfortunately, that's not possible. And that's where we need to have those conversations early and to really work out what's going to be appropriate for your budget and with all those things considered. So we're here to guide through that process, not to try to take every last little penny that's available and try to use it for our own ego driven
Yeah.
projects. So
And there's also some, you mentioned marriage counseling, but there's also kind of some psychological counseling that has to happen in there. I think people have the tendency to believe, no matter how many times a professional like you or I tells them, in their heart, they want to believe that they can get something for a lower price. They want to fit that square peg into the round hole. That's very common. Um, I know that I can build this for $200 a foot. No, you can't. I know I can. My friend did it. What kind of outcome do they have, or how many years ago did they do that? So there's a lot of kind of psychological counseling, may not be the right term, but that we have to deal with in that process, right?
Well, and there are not many architects that are competing on price. We don't talk about it, but none of our fees are shared. There's nothing like that going around. But I think what you find is that we will modify our services to fit. You know, at times, sometimes where appropriate. I mean, we're not going to take it down to a point where we're so bare bones that we can't provide the level of service that we need in order to meet that standard and to meet the kind of project we want to work on. But you won't have much success, I don't think, going to an architect and say, "Well, so and so down the street said they do it for X number of dollars. So can you?" And it's like, "Oh, that is just not. We're not an apples to apples kind of professional in that way. Just because our document delivery methods are so different, our portfolios, our reputations, status, all those things, they all come into play here. So it's really not commoditized as much as people want to try to compare the numbers. There's just so much more to it, and your personal connection, I think, is such a big part too to consider.
One thing that you and I were discussing before we started recording was how there is some um, there are some restrictions like legally and professionally that we really can't share exact data on what architects or what you charge, what different firms charge, because there was some stuff that happened years ago around price fixing, antitrust types stuff. Can you just mention that for a minute?
Yeah, from my understanding of it, because it's a little before my time,
Yeah,
but
me too.
in the early days, there was a bit more of a national consensus on what an appropriate percentage or range or fee might be, and that was deemed anti-competitive. And there were some antitrust litigations and things that went into the '90s, I think the '80s and '90s. And for anyone that wants to learn more about it, I'm sure there's plenty of really interesting reading material online. But the net result of all that is that out of concern of price fixing and anti-competitive behavior, architects as a profession are really kind of prohibited from discussing fee specifics in order to address any potential concerns about price fixing or anything that may come from that. So that's really put a big damper on any sort of standardized fee structure across the board. So that it does make it hard when somebody says, "Well, how much does this cost?" And it's the same way if someone were to ask you what a house costs or what a renovation costs, is that you really just need a lot more information in order to put a number together. But I know, for many of the architects that I know, they'd be more than happy to meet with you to iron out that information and to provide, fee estimates, ranges, things like that, so you get better understanding of that out of pocket costs that you talked about before construction starts. But yeah, unfortunately, there's not a clear,
Yeah.
here's one percentage, here's one number that's going to work. It's going to vary no matter where you go. So
Yeah, and builders deal with the same thing. In some of the NAHB groups that I'm in, it's prohibited for us to talk about these are the fees that our group charges because we don't want there to be some sense that we're trying to price fix or set a price to be kind of anti-consumer. So um, we're not saying that, hey, as a group, we're going to charge cost plus 20%. We're going to charge 125 an hour, and no, we can't do that. So uh, you know, I believe it's the same with realtors as well. People think that there's like this standard set real estate fee, but there's really not, and they have the same issues with antitrust and price fixing, to where you can't say that this is what all realtors in Houston are going to charge to sell a house. So that's a common issue among the housing industry, the design and construction industry as well. One last question here, as I've gone through, I've kind of exhausted most of my list of questions, but one last thing that popped into my head was, when people are thinking about all these costs that we just discussed that you're going to encounter before construction, um, people might be tempted to say, "Hey, I'm going to hire that less expensive professional." Just like with builders, that builder is less. He checks out. I'm going to go with the cheaper guy. What are the dangers of just kind of shopping based more on cost than looking at the level of service that you get?
Oh, I think that's a great question because every one of these numbers gets scrutinized because again, it all adds up, and if it is out of pocket, that hurts in a very different way. So I think that there's a common concern about pricing architects and comparing them on cost only instead of focusing on the value they can provide to the process. This is especially for clients that are building a forever home. This is something that you're going to be living in and waking up in and cooking, for your family and hosting, entertaining, all these things that are so critical to get just right and to make sure that you're comfortable and that you're happy in this space, that the morning light coming through your windows is just the way that you like, that your building performance goals are all there. These are all not so much cost items as they are value items that an architect can bring to the process and really help you navigate through this maze and to get something that you're really excited about, thrilled to start building. And that's where I think, yeah, you really want to factor that into your consideration when you're evaluating architects, when you're evaluating different design professionals, is the value that they're bringing beyond just that bottom line number, because you're getting the opportunity to work with someone who can come up with creative, innovative solutions for your home and how you live and host and entertain and raise your family in these spaces. And that is just such an opportunity that can really go sideways if it's a plan downloaded from the internet that you want to just drop on this site, that may not feel the way you need it to feel. It may not function the way that you need it to. So to have somebody take a personal interest in what you're trying to do and how you're trying to raise your family in this space or any other project goals that you're trying to really accomplish here. That's one where an architect will be by your side working through this, helping you guide through it. And so it's a lot more than just comparing the two firms based on that bottom line number. So I know we kind of hit that from a few different angles, but yeah, as best as possible, really think about the long term value uh, of what it means to live and exist in this space that'll be custom designed for you on your property. So
I love it. Love it. Like everything that you've said in this interview has been very in line with what we talk about. It's building the team, it's proper planning, it's communication, and kind of checking back and forth, checks and balances in the project, and you being an essential part of the project and just making sure it's executed properly. So that's our little house drawing that we keep showing in the podcast, which we'll pop on the screen one more time for y'all to see. But that's our four key components of a project that you have to have, and you kind of touched on all of them. I'm not sure if that was intentional,
oh,
but
great.
I love it. So thank you so much for joining us today, Danny. It was great to have you. Tell everyone how they can get in touch with you if they want to work with you on some design.
Oh, sure. Yeah, probably best place to start is my website, and that's just rigstudio.com, RIGG studio.com. And that's got information about me and my practice and some portfolio projects and things like that. But I'm always happy to chat. Uh, yeah, this can be a daunting process with a lot of players and a lot of unknowns, and I'm always happy to talk with folks to help them chart that initial course through. Even if it's recommending an architect that's a better fit for the location or the project type or anything like that. Um, Architects have a real marketing problem in terms of we're very hard to find. The number of times that people have searched probably best Houston architect just to try to find a jumping off point. So we're always happy to refer to colleagues and projects that are a good fit. But yeah, there's a lot of this is not a very common thing that most people do, and I recognize that, and so I try to give as much information as I can, and I'm happy to do it.
Probably a once in a lifetime thing to design and build a custom home.
All the more reason to get it right and put the right team together. So
Exactly, and I love that you have a network of fellow architects and professionals that you'll refer to. We're the same way. We realize that every project out there is not the greatest fit for us, and we have other builders, architects, partners that we refer people to all the time. And I think that's so important for people to find is as a team that knows their limitations and knows what they're good at or not good at, and say, hey, either I'm not a good fit for this, use this guy, or I'm weak in this area, let's pull this other person into the project to assist. So um, the team approach is the only way to go about this the right way, right? Thank you again, all of you, for joining us on this episode of the Your Project Shepherd podcast. Remember that if you have any questions about this show or any of them, please to send those to podcast@yourprojectshepherd.com, and we will do a Q&A episode at the end of the season to talk about those questions, and we'll try to answer all those that come in. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.